The David Cassidy Connections with Louise Poynton. Cherish the legacy.
Hello everyone and welcome to a new episode of the David Cassidy Connections, your podcast all about David, his fans, his music, friendships people have because of him, and the impact he had on so many, as we hear from friends, musicians, actors, producers, broadcasters, and many more. I'm your host, Louise Poynton, and today my guest is former television news reporter and anchor Ken Owen. Ken talks about his passion for David's music since he was a boy and explains why he credits David with helping him emerge from a shy boy into a confident young man who spent almost 20 years working in television. In 1994, he interviewed David via satellite and speaks about the importance of that encounter. He breaks down his favourite David recordings, observes how celebrity has changed, and why we shall never see a superstar like David Cassidy again. Ken left television in 2001 to become Executive Director of Media Relations at DePaul University, where he later became Special Advisor to the President. He hosted and continues to direct the university's Euban Lecture Series, which have brought a range of high-profile visitors, including Bill Clinton, Tony Blair and Mikhail Gorbachev. We also talk about how the culture of news reporting has changed. But first, Ken explains how his passion for the Partridge Family and David Cassidy's music all began. I had no idea that your passion for the Partridge Family and David Cassidy went so deep.
Oh, it's impacted much of my life. It's funny. And I was very shy. Yeah, David and Paul McCartney, I think, were really critical to kind of getting me out of my shell and, creating that thing which was in me, but I didn't know was there. David, I was just thinking as I was upstairs, I always had some pity for him. And I mean that in the dearest way. He kind of was fed into the machine and never really escaped. And God, he flailed, he tried. And, most teen idols just go away, or they do what Sean did and they find another thing that they're very good at. But but he was born to perform. And it was sad because once he was kind of pigeonholed, he never was able to, even with Blood Brothers, and we got great reviews, but it was always former teen idols, David Cassidy. You're never not that thing.
Yeah, it's an awful burden for them all to carry. He was very unique in the way he presented himself, a very good-looking guy, and that, I think, for many, clouded their judgment.
Yes.
How can he be so good-looking? How can he be such a good musician, a good actor? Nobody seemed to really accept him beyond this image, and I think he spoke about that in your one and only interview with him.
Yeah. And he, it's hard. Well, we'll talk about this stuff because it's all very interesting. But I think there's also, David had it doesn't matter. I'm straight, but David had a very feminine side to him too. I mean, I think that there was something in men and women that you could relate to, that it was kind of like Donnie was a teenage kid, with nice teeth and nice hair and nice brothers and a sister. He was lucky in that, I don't know if it was the Mormon thing or it was the family thing, but it always seemed like he wasn't kind of on a raft by himself. And with David, it was like the Beatles always say that there were three other guys around, so when things got crazy, they'd kind of get together and say, this is crazy. David didn't have that. And Donnie probably did to an extent with his brothers and his family and his, I'm not a Mormon, but I assume his faith played into it. And I don't think he had the level of crazy that David had. David looked like he'd been dropped, from a different planet. I mean, he had a different way about him. And I think one of the things that was really sad was, there were the RCA records where he really tried to show that he could do things. And then another break, the Man Undercover series, and then the Enigma record, which I think, lying to myself, hit top 40, but it was not, it wasn't worked in the way it should have been. And then why didn't Romance come out in the States? I mean, I was in a record store in Indianapolis one day, probably after a beer or two, and flipping through the CDs early in the CD, like 1985, and there's David Cassidy Romance. It's right behind me on the shelf. I can find it for you. But and you have it, I know. It did not exist. I mean, we here in America didn't even know it existed. And yeah, here it is, just like that.
There you go.
But so here's David Cassidy with his first record basically since Getting in the Street, I think. Am I right?
Yeah.
So it's 7 or 8 year gap, and it doesn't even come out in America, which seems crazy, with George Michael on backing vocals on a track. It's just crazy. So how did that happen? And then the Enigma thing, which, he shows up on, he looks great, and he's kind of in fighting form, and the record is moving along, and then poof, that goes away. And then, a couple of records that were, that didn't used to be was okay. But then he got into the, covering stuff, and he never really got off that train. It's like in 1992 or 93, he just kind of gave in to the fact that he was a nostalgia act, and suffered for it, I think. I was trying to look up the last time I saw him live. The only time I saw him live, actually, was at the Indiana State Fair. And it was a really sad show because it was nostalgia. It was long, I'll Meet You Halfway, Long, I Think I Love You. And they're great songs. We both love them. But, he spent so many years complaining about being in the trap. And then he inserted himself right back into it full-fledged, because I guess that's how you pay your bills. But It was sad.
It's interesting. Whenever I speak to friends in the States, Keith Partridge is always there. Over here, he never really had that baggage with him.
Oh, wow. That's interesting.
And he'd been on holiday in Italy, and he suddenly just turned up to do some promotions with Bell. And his hair was long and greasy, and he wore a long coat and furry boots. And he looked like a rock star.
And he did look like a rock star. Yeah, there's no doubt about it.
And even though we had the Partridge Family here, it wasn't on air for very long, only like 3 months. And it didn't come back on again for some time. So when he came over here, he was the real rock star.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. The sad piece of that is that he didn't, the stuff he was putting out was, again, somebody else's. He still didn't have a musical identity. He related more to that music, but he wasn't allowed to create music, or he didn't permit himself to make music. He might be able to present to people and say, hey, I just wrote this and it's great.
Exactly. I mean, you once said that you'd observed that you felt you could have managed him.
Oh, yeah.
And taken him to a different place. What would you actually have done to have made it better for him?
And I was thinking about that. I'm friends with Todd Rundgren. Todd's different from David in that Todd is such an artiste in the way he views it. There's business and there's art. And so there's a big highway between the two. So the business people take care of business, and he takes care of the art. And I think management is such a tricky thing. But when I was in high school and college, I could not stand Todd Rundgren because I loved his hits, but I could never understand his eccentricities. And it's now the eccentricities that I love. It's kind of interesting. But in 1977, backstage with somebody is talking about how, records, at some point, we're not going to have records. You're just going to go somewhere. It's just going to come into your home through some system. And this is pre-internet, pre-everything. So, I like my records, though.
Yes.
I'll tell you, I mean, there's a story behind every record I own. And seeing this for the first time and thinking, God, where did that come from?
I don't know what you feel, but I feel he was totally underappreciated.
Incredible singer. And in fact, anyone that's really listened to David Cassidy critically will go, God, that guy could sing. You can question the material, you can question the outfit, you can question, any number of things, the arrangement, but the guy could sing.
Let's talk about growing up watching the Partridge Family and how big an influence the music, the show, and David Cassidy was on your life.
Well, and thanks, Louise, for the opportunity to do this. This is terrific, and you're terrific. Thanks for all you do on behalf of David Cassidy and his legacy. Really, it's great. When I guess Partridge Family came on, and was it late 70 or early 71? It would have been September.
September 25, 1970.
I love your accuracy. Precise. When it first came on, I remember, the first record, and I remember a couple of people in my circle of friends. I was 9, about to turn 10, talking about this show. And I was watching the Brady Bunch at the time. It just seemed like the last thing I needed was another family to follow. Of course, all I had was time on my hands, and there were 3 channels, so I don't know what I was worried about. But I probably was reluctant at first. I think I Love You did not strike me initially as a song I would really like. To be a 9-year-old boy and to see this guy, but that's the guy you wanted to be. That you wanted to be, taking Bonnie Kleinschmidt to the taco stand. You wanted to be driving around in a convertible. You wanted to be singing. You wanted to be, it was interesting. They had this great lifestyle, and they'd always play these little clubs with like 12 people in there, but they had it going on. And so as a young boy, you're I think there are two things that matter to you: being appealing to girls, and then having fun, having a life where you're doing things that you like and that you're carefree about. And David really conveyed that, through his persona. And I grew up as a kid, and you had to admire Elvis, and I have many, many, many of his records, but there are some back there too that you can't see on camera. Well, I like music, but Elvis was always, he's kind of greasy, and he had the leather jacket on, and he looked like, I'm sure if you put David Cassidy and Elvis Presley in a fist fight, it'd be a draw. But he conveyed this kind of, other side of the street thing. I mean, David was the all-American boy, but there was a lightness to him. In some ways, when people weren't even talking about gay people on television, and he wasn't gay, but he conveyed a femininity that was, unusual for the time. Not unlike David Bowie, really, if you look back at it. Yeah, there was something about his character that was very different about what you saw on television. Yeah, you didn't see, he's kind of flippant, he's cool, he's nice, he's a good brother. So there were a lot of takeaways you could get from David Cassidy. And then, the music was, they hired him not knowing he could sing, really. And, that became the real treat. You were treated to a song every week. And it was a magical thing being a kid growing up in that world, because we didn't have all these, silly devices, and you weren't.
Life was simple.
Oh, my Lord. Yes. But the other thing is we had a common language. You're in the UK, I'm in Indiana. Because of technology then, it was so limited. Each of us has a broadcast tower and a printing press these days. Back then, you needed to be a network or a newspaper, a chain, but there were so few people controlling information, which in many ways is a bad thing. But I really think it's important to have gatekeepers. We're learning that today. Just making anybody the chief of police isn't a good thing, right? And you need some special skills and training and experience to do that. I think the other thing is that because there were 3 channels, you went to school on Monday. Someone would say, "Did you watch Sandy Duncan had a show? Did you watch?" "Oh, no, I don't watch Sandy. I watch the Brady Bunch and the Partridge Family." But you knew all the shows that were on. Now you go to a party and somebody says, "Hey, have you watched this show?" And you go, "Where did you see that?" "Oh, Hulu or Netflix." And it's a foreign language. It's like somebody speaking Mandarin to me. I just have no idea what they're talking about. But we had these things, and they were important, because when you went to school, you could talk about, Danny did this crazy thing and Ruben had to bail him out of it. As silly as that is, we had this glue that brought us together as people to talk about things. And nowadays we're siloed. And whether it's music or it's politics or whatever it is, you've got your own individual brand. You may have friends that never even consider the things that are in your world. And we've lost something there. I think it was simple, and in some ways it was kind of quaint, but quaint isn't always bad. So yes, I quickly became a supporter. And then when I got into it in a big way.
It was a pure escapism as well, because I know in the States you were just coming out of a very dark period, and you needed something bright and colourful and cheerful.
And we got Watergate, how?
Well, we'll come on to journalism later. Washington Post. Exactly. Like you were saying just now, we needed in our lives someone we could identify with. And I found it always rather resentful that you had to like one of the Beatles and you had to like one of the Monkees. Yeah. And suddenly this solo artist bursts onto the scene, and he belongs to you. He's from your era. And someone you can relate to, and helps to give you an identity.
David was carefree, whimsical, fun. And I think the really critical thing to think about, I think about this a lot, music and culture in the 90s really turned dark. And it was starting to turn dark in the mid-70s. We were exploring themes in movies and television even that we weren't. The 50s were just Warden June, and where's my sweater and my slippers, and is the newspaper over there? It was so far toward the bland, and I mean, great stuff there too, but of the time. But I think David conveyed a happiness, a contentedness. He was the character. Keith Partridge was very confident. Yeah, he had quirks, and he, when he was alone, he'd convey the confidence, and then he'd go. Yeah. But he was a lot like a lot of us were, and vulnerable in certain ways, not overly emotionally so, and not like wrestling with his conscience all the time, but trying to grow up, trying to get a date for the prom, trying to write the next hit song as Keith Partridge, and so you could identify with that. But it was all, the arc was all up. It was all good. There weren't episodes where he got one of his classmates pregnant, or they abused opioids in the men's room of the school. Maybe that's Pollyanna stuff. Maybe that's reflective of the kind of blissful time we grew up in. But I think that conveys to your life. And I think there are pieces of David Cassidy, who I never met in person once, interviewed him by satellite and saw him live. But there are elements of him in my personality to this day, and that's a powerful thing when you're you're given the platform, and you use it for good, and you're able to convey things that not only are good but are meaningful to people. He did a lot of good for a lot of people, as Keith Partridge and beyond.
When you interviewed him that day in 1994, when he was sitting in Disneyland, that must have been quite a surreal moment, because I know that it was unprepared.
I used to sit in the newsroom with Patty Spittler, who was my co-anchor at 5:30. The newsroom was in the basement of the building. Not an attractive room at all, but there might have been 70 of us down there at a given point. And so Patty was the entertainment reporter. Literally, she was on the A-list of celebrity interviewers. But then she'd get these things where you can interview ex-celebrity via satellite, which means you sit in the chair upstairs, and they're somewhere in the studio, and you banter back and forth, and it's recorded on your end. You edit something together and you put it on the air. Usually they're promoting a record or a movie. For them, it avoids the trouble of going somewhere. They're just going to a studio, and they can do 30 stations in one day. So I'm down there, and it must have been like 1:30 in the afternoon too. And she got busy doing something. And she said, I think somebody came down and said, we're ready for you upstairs, Patty. And she said, oh, I'm just going to cancel this thing. And I said, what is it? And she said, it's David Cassidy. And I said, if you can't do it, I'll do it. I mean, I'd really like to do it. And I mean, it literally came together like that. So I think my tie was off, and I was, we were 3.5 hours from airtime, probably. And so I had about 90 seconds to get up the stairs, not lose my breath in doing so, sit in the chair, make sure I didn't look like, some sweaty guy, and just fire away. So as I'm making the trip upstairs, which is probably like 140 steps, I'm thinking, what am I going to do? And I think I looked at it again today. It was July 1st, 1994, actually. And there I get to throw a date at you. He was at Disney World, and I think it was just, I think they just would bring celebrities in and have them do these things to just show off Disney World and get 3 or 4 minutes on the local news that night with, Mickey Mouse in the background, plant little seeds in little people's heads. I got up there, and, you've seen it. He thinks it's going to be Patty. It's Ken. I guess I really wanted him. I've always felt some pity for David, because he was fed into this machine that made him a star. And he was able to parlay that into a long career and fame. And, he's someone that got to do what few people do. But he didn't always get to do it on his terms. And once you jump into that waiting pool, it's almost like it's got some sulfuric acid in it or something. You're never quite the same. And I think he struggled with it. And he was a person who had great talent. He bounced better than most teen idols do. Most teen idols, being a teen idol today is a lot different than it was in 1970, because you've seen what happened with One Direction and some of these bands. People aren't as tainted as they were back then. But back then you had the serious musicians and the people who didn't bathe, whatever their thing was, or, they played a mean guitar. And if your first exposure to someone is smiling Keith Partridge with the little necklace on, you think, okay, he's Hollywood. He's playing something. But the guy could sing. And the guy was not a bad actor, and he was anyway fed down the chute. So when I went up the stairs, the one thing I wanted to convey to him through his little earpiece was that you you've done some really good things, and I know you're trying. It's not in vain, and keep slugging. I think it's interesting to think back today in 2021 to 1994. He had Partridge Family obviously happened. He signed to RCA, and he had the 3 records that they didn't know what to do with them. I don't think the public knew what to do with them. But then he went away for a while again. The David Cassidy Man Undercover. There was the Enigma record with Lying to Myself on it, which hit the top 40, and he looked great. He was in fighting shape. It looked like he was going to roar back. I don't think that label had the promotional heft to, really keep that boat going. And I think part of it I like the album, but I think part of it there may not have been a second single on that was strong enough. And my recollection is the label pretty quickly had financial problems. In 1994, he'd had another top 40 hit 5 years before. He'd had the Didn't You Used to Be record, which was okay, but he was journeying back into kind of a no man's land where he wound up kind of living the rest of his days. As much as he was pained by what the teen idol experience did to him, and cognizant of the fact that he was sitting in places like Disney World because he was Keith Partridge, he wanted to be David Cassidy. He wanted to express himself and put his voice out there. It's just ironic and sad that I think it was after that, 94, 95, he had the Touch of Blue. Maybe it was 2000 or so, but he forayed more into the redoing stuff, covering other people's stuff. And again, he was a great singer. But the thing that always bothered him, and the thing that I always craved, and you probably did too, was more of the real him. Walking the plank. And it's not as easy as that. You get a record deal and somebody says, hey, we need something that sounds like this, or we got to remind people of the fact you're that guy. So you never clearly escape it. So this is my copy of Romance. And you guys across the pond, I mean, you probably had this stacks of these in the store, right?
Yeah.
But it was 1985 or 6. I was at a store in Indianapolis. I was just amazed. Number one, I'd never seen a David Cassidy CD. We in America didn't even know this record existed. And that's another shameful thing, is that Arista, which put this out with George Michael singing backing on The Last Kiss, didn't even release it in America, getting it in the street. When that record came out in 1977, I had bought Home Is Where the Heart Is. And I literally searched for that record because I knew it was out there, but you could not find a copy of that. It took me until I was probably 40 years old to get that record, because I don't know if RCA just decided, they pressed the record and decided this thing's not going anywhere, and they just dumped him in a cutout bin. That's kind of the legend. Yes.
That was a superb album. He worked with some terrific people, and he started to write some really wonderful songs with Jerry Beckley. If he'd been able to put a proper band together, I think it would have relaunched his career. I agree.
And I Damned If This Ain't Love from Home Is Where the Heart is just a great song. When I was in college, I would play that on the radio. So it would have been 1979, 80. And I would never announce on the front end who it was. And, the people would call and they go, oh, that's a good song. Who's that? It's David Cassidy. Wow. Or his cover of Tomorrow, which is better than Paul McCartney's. And I love Paulie, but Wildlife is a pretty stripped down record. But David really realized, the power of that song through the production of that record. No, you're absolutely right. And I think back to the teen idol thing, if I were the king of the forest, if I do my best Cowardly Lion, if I were managing David Cassidy and he'd be in real trouble then, I probably would have convinced him, and he would have pushed back, that he should have gone, put together the band you described, and just played clubs. Go to the Troubadour, go to play some backhole place in Nebraska, play at some bar down the street here in Indianapolis, but reinvent yourself from the ground up and let people know that, I'm serious about this. Now, the problem is, and we have it in our lives, you get to a certain level in your life, you expect a certain income. There's a certain level of pain in the patoot of, leaving the house and doing things. And so you expect to make it be rewarding. He'd already reaped all the benefits of being Keith Partridge and the Partridge Family records, his solo stuff. He has cred. I mean, I think musicians, and I've spent a lot of time around musicians in my life, all, they know the voice. I mean, Bobby Sherman couldn't sing. I mean, he couldn't not sing, but it wasn't anything special. And David Cassidy, when he sang, he owned a song. I think a lot about the time between Dreams Are Nothing More Than Wishes, first RCA record, The Higher They Climb. I'm sure he really had to be let down by the response those records got. I mean, I think there were people that loved them and got like we did, and there were critics that embraced them to a degree, but it was always he's trying a comeback. It's he's reinventing himself. It was always that the ghost of Keith Partridge is always in the back of the room, glaring at him. And then, Romance, I think, again, how that wasn't released in America, because it was a huge hit in the UK, was it?
It was.
Huge. So, he was almost like a whack-a-mole. He just kept popping up and, but something was knocking him down. I think he finally, by the time we did that interview, he looks great. He sounds great. He's happy, seemingly. The demons just took over, and it's really sad. I saw him the only time I saw David Cassidy live, and I always wanted to see him in his heyday. Actually, I saw him twice. I'm forgetting. I saw him open for the Beach Boys. It's a big shed here up in Noblesville. Back then they called it Deer Creek Music Center. And I remember I was visiting my parents in Chicago, and I left early because I was determined to see David Cassidy live. This would have been 1989 or 90, probably 90. So this place, the capacity is probably 22, 25,000. I got to the venue, parked in the lot, and somebody offered me a free ticket. Great. So I walked up. David came out. He did Lying to Myself. He did 3 or 4 songs from the then current record. Looked great. He sounded great. He was the opening act. People seemed to be into it. So I saw him that night, and there was that energy and hope that maybe there's a second, third, fourth act for this guy, playing in a big shed and, having the energy of a rock star. And then I saw him in 2007 at the Indiana State Fair, and he was, he'd fallen into the kind of the same show he was doing toward the end. Not great mementos. I mean, it's great to have anything, but basically doing the thing that he complained about through the 80s and 90s. I'm not Keith Partridge. I'm better than the Partridge Family is wonderful, but I'm a different person. I have different musical tastes, and, you just got the same set of songs every night with a couple of covers thrown in. And again, we wanted to see him. I think a lot about, his half-brother, Sean, and David had, I'm presuming, Cassidy Live was probably the last record on his deal with Bell. Sean had one record left on Warner Brothers, and he had 2 ways to go. He could have made another Sean Cassidy record, but he hired Todd Rundgren, and Wasp was the result. And it is so weird. And the fact that Sean Cassidy basically slammed the door on his pop idolness by making a record with a Talking Heads and David Bowie cover and some weird originals that Todd wrote. Oh, now Sean was, when he did that, he was done. And I realized he's been performing again a little bit lately, which is great. But what a final kind of last act is to, say defiantly, you think that's Sean Cassidy, this is Sean Cassidy. And to make the record you really want to make. And David never really got that chance. Dreams Are Nothing More Than Wishes is probably as close as he came to that. That one confounded his younger fans, covering things like Valley High.
There's 2 things there. First of all, his music, when he was doing covers of various songs, and be they songs from Hollywood musicals or from the likes of the Beatles or Chicago, that introduced everyone to a whole new set of music.
Yes.
So because of him, your world of music opened up to far more serious music. But also, wouldn't you consider that the higher they climb, he was trying to send out a message? This is what it was like. It was hell on earth.
I think, to make a concept record and to make it basically about yourself without, ever identifying as that person. But it's, the higher they climb, the harder they fall. You've got this great, cherubic young guy reaching for a star on the front cover with a guitar slung over his shoulder. In the back, it's like Beirut. I mean, he's been blown up. And I don't know. Part of it is, he signed to RCA, and I'm sure RCA looked at the stats and said, "Oh, look at all those records he sold for Bell. He's still got to have some fans." But I don't think they had a real strategy for him or for marketing it. Like Get It Up for Love's a good song. I guess if you're a radio program director, what do you do with it? And who is the desirable audience? You're going to have trouble getting airplay. You're going to have trouble. I don't know. I'd have to spend a couple of weeks just thinking about, what I would do. But I think in a way, once he sang "I Think I Love You" as Keith Partridge, that's his musical epitaph to this day. I mean, that's embedded in most people's minds. It is far from David Cassidy's greatest moment, by far. It's hard to shake that. It's back to Todd Rundgren. The first song he ever wrote when he was 16 is "Hello, It's Me." He can't stand the song. He ripped it off of Jimmy Smith or somebody. It's his albatross. But like David, it's that thing that people go, "Hello, Todd, it's me." You got that right. Now, how many people would not love to have a song that identifies them?
I was going to ask you, Ken, with Todd having worked with Sean, do you know if he ever would have liked to have worked with David?
We've never discussed it. I will ask him one of these days.
I know how much you like getting it in the street.
I do, yes.
I feel that it was mishandled, but working with Mick Ronson, working with Jerry Beckley, who produced the album, he was going to be working with David Bowie, and Elton John wanted to produce him, and you wonder what happened.
Yeah.
Was it because he perhaps didn't believe in himself enough, or think, if I change myself musically too much, are they still going to like me? Was it a question of self-worth?
I'm sure it was. I think in the end, it was like David never really had too many opportunities to identify his actual voice. You Can't Go Home Again from Dreams Are Nothing More Than Wishes is one of my favorite songs. It's a song he really inhabits, and it's a very melancholy song, obviously. And in many ways, that's the story of his life. Once he walked on the set the first day of the Partridge Family, the David Cassidy that existed up until that moment was gone. And there was no getting the genie back in the bottle. And, the nice homes, pretty women, all the stuff that he enjoyed. It's not like it's the saddest story of all time, but we all get wistful about that time in our lives where things made more sense, where the people we all loved were alive, all these things. And that song kind of embodies what it is to start seeing the treadmill moving. You realize that I'm not going to be a kid forever. I'm not going to have the big head of hair and the big teeth. And someday I'll be just like my grandfather. And there's that feeling that when we were watching the Partridge Family as kids, it was just this world of possibility. But this range of young people who had nothing but their lives in front of them. Yeah, he had that kind of magical window. And maybe those 3 RCA records, as good as they are, but because they were so poorly promoted and they really didn't have a place in the marketplace, maybe they created clutter in a moment where he needed clarity. I don't know. I mean, I would not want those records to go away. I love them.
Is it not quite common, though, for artistic and talented people, as you said to me before, to sometimes make some very poor decisions?
Oh, they're awful. I mean, and it's not a criticism at all. I think there are business people that you would never want to put on a stage with a guitar. I'm not sure I want to see Steve Cook from Apple or Richard Branson, in tight pants singing, Band on the Run. No. So yeah, keep them out of that. And then I think, artists, if they're really creative people, and there are creative people, like I would say Mick Jagger is a hell of a businessman, but most artists don't have the time for it. They hire people, and if they're smart, they get good people. If they're unlucky,